wasn't just a prison, it was his stomach.
Something's not right here. It's looking at us.
These capsules, these are their memories, their last moments. We're not in prison, we're in his mouth.
We became a part of it.
You're next.
The Astralis emerged from hyperspace with a jolt, the vibrations of its jump engines still humming through the deck plates. Sam Relin sat in the dimly lit observation bay, staring into the void ahead. The anomaly hovered there, a blot of blackness against the faint glimmer of a dying star. It wasn't just dark, it was hungry. The light around it seemed to bend and dim as though the void itself was devouring the last remnants of the star's warmth. "Preliminary scans are inconclusive," came the voice of Captain Teth over the intercom. "We're deploying drones to map the structure. All personnel remain on standby." Sam ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his eyes fixed on the monitors. The anomaly wasn't natural. Its edges were too precise, its core too stable. He glanced at Mina Oren, seated nearby with her tablet. She was focused, her brow furrowed as she skimmed the biosignature readings from the anomaly. "Organic," Mina muttered, "but nothing like I've seen before. It's alive, but it's not thriving. It's dormant." Sam shivered. Dormant was never a comforting word. The drones returned hours later, their data revealing the object's shape, a massive fortress-like structure, its exterior a strange amalgamation of stone and sinew. The surface shifted, almost imperceptibly, like breathing flesh encased in armor. Patterns etched into its walls pulsed faintly with an inner light, casting alien shadows that danced like writhing figures. "I don't like this," said Tor, the mechanic, as the crew gathered in the briefing room. "We're a science vessel, not some expeditionary force. Whatever's in there, it's not for us to mess with." "We're here to understand," Mina countered. "And if this thing poses any danger, it's better we know what it is." Teth nodded. "We're going in. Prepare for a boarding mission. Full precautions." The shuttle ride was suffocatingly silent. Sam gripped the edge of his seat, his pulse quickening as the structure grew larger in the viewport. The closer they got, the more the prison seemed to ripple, as though aware of their approach. Its sheer scale was overwhelming. It stretched endlessly in all directions, its surface covered in jagged protrusions and undulating ridges that gave it the appearance of a creature frozen mid-writhing. The shuttle docked at what appeared to be an entrance, a gaping maw-like opening rimmed with jagged tooth-like spines. As the team disembarked, their helmets filled with a low hum, a sound that seemed to emanate from the prison itself. The air was thick and cloying, carrying an unplaceable scent that Sam could only describe as decay, mixed with something sweet and metallic. Inside, the walls glistened with a fleshy, translucent sheen. Tendrils of some organic material snaked along the floor and ceiling, pulsating faintly with light. The texture of the walls shifted as they moved, forming vague impressions, shapes that almost resembled faces or hands, before dissolving back into smooth surfaces. Sam's heart raced as a whisper brushed against his mind. It wasn't a sound, but a sensation, a fleeting thought that wasn't his own. He glanced at Mina, who was staring at the walls, her expression a mix of fascination and unease. "This place, it's not just alive," she murmured. "It's thinking." Deeper into the structure, they found the vault. The door was a massive ribbed membrane, glistening with an oily sheen. Tor hesitated before placing his hand on it, but the door reacted instantly, splitting open with a wet, squelching sound. Beyond it was a cavernous chamber filled with rows of bioorganic capsules. They stood upright, each pulsating softly with a dim light that seemed to beat in time with the hum of the prison. Mina approached the nearest capsule, her gloved hand trembling slightly as she touched it. The capsule responded, its surface glowing brighter. An image formed within, a shifting indistinct figure that seemed to be screaming, though no sound emerged. "It's a record," Mina said, her voice barely above a whisper. These are memories." Sam stepped closer, his breath catching in his throat. The capsule's glow intensified, and a sudden surge of emotion hit him. Fear, despair, the suffocating weight of being trapped. He staggered back, gasping. "This isn't a prison," he managed, his voice shaking. "It's a graveyard." The hum grew louder, and the walls seemed to contract slightly, as though the prison was drawing them deeper into its grasp. The team exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. "Let's get what we need and get out," Teth ordered, his voice firm. But even as he spoke, Sam felt it, the faintest pull, like an invisible thread tightening around his mind. The prison wasn't just a structure, it was a predator, and they had just stepped into its maw. The capsules were endless, arranged in concentric circles that seemed to spiral infinitely into the dim light of the chamber. Each glowed faintly, its hue shifting between shades of sickly green and pulsating amber, as though breathing. Mina's fingers hovered over one, hesitant before she finally pressed her hand against its surface. A sudden jolt passed through the air, and the capsule's glow brightened. The membrane stretched, forming a translucent window that revealed something inside, shapes moving, voices whispering, and a scene unfolding like a living memory. Sam instinctively stepped closer, the hairs on his arms rising as the room darkened. The capsule's display engulfed them. The image flickered and resolved into clarity. A crystalline being, tall and angular, stood on a barren plain beneath a violet sky. Its voice, a resonant hum, filled the room as it narrated in a language none of them recognized. Yet the capsule translated it not into sound but into thought. Images, emotions, and meaning pouring directly into their minds. It described its capture in agonizing detail, how the Void Eater emerged from a star it had consumed, a mass of shifting tendrils and pulsing light that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. The being had tried to escape, but its body was pulled apart, each shard suspended in a web of energy. Over centuries, the Void Eater fed on its consciousness, savoring every memory, every fragment of identity. When it was finally hollowed out, it was discarded into the prison, its crystalline form now embedded into the walls, a silent scream frozen in its jagged features. The capsule dimmed, releasing them from its grip. Mina staggered back, her hand clutching her chest. It's feeding on them," she said, her voice shaking. "Not just their bodies. It's taking everything, their minds, their identities, their souls, if you believe in that. Tor's face was pale. We shouldn't be here. They moved to the next capsule, unable to resist the morbid pull of the stories it contained. This time, the figure within was bipedal but insectoid, its carapace glistening with metallic hues. The memory it shared was chaotic, fragmented, a hive of its kind torn apart as the Void Eater descended, its tendrils splitting and absorbing them one by one. Those captured were warped into monstrous forms, their bodies reshaped into living weapons. The insectoid survivor recounted how its comrades, now grotesque hybrids of flesh and chitin, turned on it, dragging it into the Void Eater's maw. Sam flinched as the vision ended, his stomach churning. The prison wasn't just a cell, it was a breeding ground for horrors, a workshop where the Void Eater twisted its victims into tools for its hunger. As they continued, the capsules grew darker, their contents more disturbing. One contained a creature that had been fused with others of its kind, their bodies melded into a single writhing mass. Another depicted a humanoid figure that had been transformed into a pulsating conduit, its veins glowing as it channeled energy to sustain the Void Eater. The creature's voice lingered in their minds long after its story ended. I am hollow. I am a passage. I am its will. The final capsule in the central row drew their attention. Its glow was brighter, more intense, and as Mina touched it, the walls of the room quivered. The figure inside was humanoid, but its features were distorted, its face a patchwork of twisted expressions that seemed to shift with every blink. Its story was not told in fragments, but as an overwhelming deluge, visions of the Void Eater's birth, from a collapsing star, its hunger insatiable as it tore through dimensions, devouring worlds and minds alike. The figure had been a hunter, a warrior who sought to destroy the Void Eater, but was instead ensnared. It described the prison's construction, a desperate attempt by an ancient civilization to contain the creature. They had sacrificed millions to create the structure, weaving their minds into its walls to create a barrier that could both hold and feed the Void Eater. But even this was a fragile solution. The prison was never meant to last forever. It was a dam holding back an ocean, and the cracks were beginning to show. As the capsule dimmed, Sam fell to his knees, his breathing ragged. The weight of the memories pressed down on him, a suffocating force that left him gasping. "This isn't just a prison," he said, his voice trembling. "It's a machine that's breaking down." Mina's eyes darted to the walls, where faint impressions of faces rippled across the surface. "And we're standing in the middle of it." A sudden noise made them all jump, a deep, resonant groan that seemed to echo from the prison itself. The hum grew louder, and the capsules began to pulse in unison, their light flickering erratically. The room seemed to close in around them, the walls pressing inward. Teth's voice came through their comms, sharp and urgent. "We've got movement in the outer corridors. Something's waking up. Get back to the shuttle, now." But Sam hesitated, his eyes fixed on the capsules. The faces within stared back at him, their expressions pleading, desperate. They weren't just records. They were still alive, trapped and suffering, their minds feeding the Void Eater. Mina grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the exit. "We can't help them," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "We'll die here if we try." As they fled the chamber, the last thing Sam saw was the capsules dimming, their glow fading into the suffocating darkness. The whispers followed them, growing louder until they weren't sure if they were coming from the prison or from their own minds. The air inside the prison had grown heavier, denser, as though it were seeping into their lungs and rooting itself inside them. The walls, once merely alien and grotesque, now seemed alive in a way that was impossible to ignore. They pulsed faintly at first, but with growing intensity, the rhythm syncing disturbingly with the team's own heartbeats. Sam felt it in his chest, a subtle, invasive thrum that made his breaths come shallow and fast. It started small, almost trivial. Sam noticed a faint shimmer on his hand as he inspected his equipment. At first, he thought it was sweat or a trick of the dim light. But as he moved, the shimmer caught the light unnaturally, revealing veins beneath his skin that glowed faintly with a sickly green hue. He rubbed at it, his heart quickening, but the glow didn't fade. "Sam, you okay?" Mina's voice startled him, and he quickly pulled his sleeve down. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." He wasn't sure if she bought it, but she didn't press further. Mina herself looked pale, her cheeks hollowed, though her eyes burned with an almost feverish intensity. She seemed more engrossed in the capsules they'd found, her focus unshaken, even as the hum of the prison grew louder. The sound wasn't just in their ears anymore, it was in their skulls, resonating in their very bones. The first real sign something was wrong came when Tor failed to respond to a comm check. They found him hours later in one of the lower corridors, partially fused to the wall. His body was twisted, his arms stretched and contorted as though the prison had melted and reshaped him like wax. His face was still recognizable, but his eyes were wide and unblinking, and his mouth was frozen mid-scream. The tendrils of the wall had wrapped around him, pulsating in rhythm with the ever-present hum. Mina leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "It's using him, feeding on him." "We need to leave," Sam said, his voice shaking. "Now." But Mina didn't move. She was staring at Tor, her hand reaching out as if compelled. Sam grabbed her wrist, pulling her back. Her skin was cold and clammy, her veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. She met his gaze, and for a moment, he saw something flicker in her eyes, something that wasn't Mina. "It's too late," she whispered. "Don't you feel it? It's in us." Sam tried to deny it, but deep down he knew she was right. His own body betrayed him, his hands trembled, and his reflection in the darkened surface of a capsule showed the same faint glow beneath his skin. Over the next few hours, the changes accelerated. Tor's body was fully absorbed into the wall, leaving only a vague impression of his twisted form behind. The other team members began to exhibit symptoms, coughing up dark, viscous fluid, patches of skin hardening or becoming translucent, and a growing sense of disconnection from themselves. Sam watched in horror as Dr. Klein, the geologist, convulsed violently before collapsing. When they turned her over, her chest had split open, not from trauma, but as though the skin had parted willingly. Beneath, something alien pulsed, a mass of writhing tendrils that spread out like roots, merging with the floor beneath her. Klain was alive, but no longer human. She whispered incoherent fragments as the prison claimed her fully, her body dissolving into the fleshy surface. The team was down to Sam and Mina. Their comms were silent now, the rest of the crew either consumed or transformed into grotesque extensions of the prison. Mina's condition worsened. She spoke less and less, her sentences breaking into fragments of alien speech, words that Sam didn't recognize but felt deep in his mind. Her body was changing too, her fingertips extended into long, needle-like points, and her movements became erratic, almost inhuman. "We have to stop it," Mina said suddenly, her voice hollow. "The Void Eater, it's waking up." Sam stared at her, panic clawing at his throat. "We can't stop this, Mina. We have to find a way out." She shook her head, her face eerily calm. "It's not just the prison. We're part of it now. If we leave, it'll take us with it. It'll spread." Sam wanted to argue, but deep down he knew she was right. The prison wasn't just feeding on them, it was changing them, turning them into something new, something it could use. And if they left, they might carry it with them. They made their way deeper into the prison, toward the pulsing core that Mina claimed held the key to shutting it down. The corridors were alive with movement now, shapes in the darkness, figures that once resembled their crewmates but were now unrecognizable. Their forms were twisted and grotesque, a fusion of alien and human features, their eyes glowing with the same green light that now pulsed faintly beneath Sam's skin. One of them lunged at Sam, its arms stretching unnaturally, fingers tipped with razor-sharp claws. He fired his weapon, the blast tearing through the creature, but it barely slowed. Mina stepped forward, her glowing hands reaching out, and the creature froze mid-stride, convulsing violently before collapsing. She turned to Sam, her eyes burning with that same green light. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice distant, almost mechanical. "It's waking up." Sam nodded, fear tightening in his chest as they pressed on, deeper into the nightmare that awaited them at the core. The core of the prison pulsed with a blinding, sickly green light, illuminating the jagged organic walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air here was thick, almost liquid, and each step Sam took felt like wading through the weight of his own dread. Mina led the way, her movements now unnervingly fluid, her body swaying as if she were part of the prison itself. The glowing tendrils that had sprouted from her fingertips left faint trails in the air, marking her path. Sam barely recognized her anymore, but she was still talking to him, guiding him. That was enough, for now. The chamber opened before them like a vast, grotesque cathedral. The walls shimmered and shifted, etched with writhing, half-formed faces that seemed to scream silently as they twisted and melted back into the flesh-like surface. At the center of the room was the Void Eater. It wasn't a creature so much as a presence, a pulsating mass of tendrils and amorphous light that defied logic. It existed in layers, its form splitting and refracting in ways that hurt to look at, as though it were moving through dimensions Sam couldn't perceive. Within its swirling core, fragments of countless faces flickered, alien, human, and something in between, all screaming, all trapped in eternal agony. Mina stopped a few feet from the entity, her glowing eyes fixed on it. "This is what it's been waiting for," she whispered. "To wake, to feed again." Sam raised his weapon, his hands trembling. "What do we do? How do we stop it?" Mina turned to him, and for a moment, her expression softened, as if the old Mina were still somewhere inside. "The prison isn't just holding it, it's sustaining it. If we destroy the core, we sever its connection, but—" She hesitated, the glow in her eyes dimming briefly. "It won't go quietly." The Void Eater began to move, its tendrils unfurled, writhing toward them with an unnatural grace. The hum that had haunted them since they entered the prison rose to a deafening crescendo, a sound that wasn't just heard but felt, vibrating in their bones and minds. Sam stumbled back, his vision blurring as the tendrils reached for him. Mina stepped forward, her hands raised. The tendrils stopped inches from her, quivering as if testing her resolve. She turned to Sam, her voice calm but distant. "I can hold it back, but only for a little while." "No," Sam said, shaking his head. "We'll find another way. There has to be another way." "There isn't," Mina said, her voice soft but firm. "It's already inside me, Sam. I'm part of it now. That's why I can do this." Before he could protest, Mina's body began to change. Her skin darkened, her veins glowing brighter as the tendrils from her hands stretched and connected with the Void Eater. The creature recoiled at first, as if shocked, but then its movements became more frantic, its light flaring as it fought against her. "Go," Mina said, her voice strained. "The control panel is in the center. Overload the system. Destroy it." Sam hesitated, his chest tight with fear and guilt. But there was no time to argue. He ran, weaving through the chaos as the room erupted around him. Tendrils lashed out, tearing through the walls and floor, sending shards of organic material flying. The prison itself was reacting to the struggle, its structure groaning and shifting as if alive. The control panel was a grotesque, pulsing mass of tissue and machinery, its surface covered in alien symbols that glowed faintly. Sam placed his hands on it, his fingers sinking slightly into the organic surface. The symbols rearranged themselves, responding to his touch, and a deep vibration coursed through the room. Behind him, Mina screamed, a sound that was both human and alien. He turned to see her body writhing, her form almost unrecognizable as the Void Eater's tendrils wrapped around her, pulling her closer to its core. But she fought back, her own tendrils glowing with an intensity that burned through the creature's flesh. "Hurry!" she cried, her voice breaking. "Do it now!" Sam forced himself to look away, his fingers flying across the control panel as he activated the prison's overload sequence. The symbols flashed red, and a low, ominous tone echoed through the chamber. The Void Eater shrieked, a sound that pierced through Sam's mind like 1,000 needles. It thrashed wildly, its tendrils tearing apart the room in a desperate bid to escape. But Mina held firm, her body glowing brighter and brighter until she was a blinding beacon of light. "Sam," her voice came again, softer now. He turned, tears streaming down his face. She was smiling, her face twisted and alien, but her eyes were still hers. "Run." The prison began to collapse, its walls imploding as the overload sequence reached its peak. Sam stumbled toward the exit, the ground shaking beneath him. Behind him, the Void Eater let out one final, deafening roar as the light from Mina's body consumed it. The last thing he saw before the door, sealed behind him, was her form dissolving into pure energy, her sacrifice consuming the Void Eater entirely. Sam barely made it to the escape pod. The prison's destruction sent shockwaves through the void, and the pod's systems screamed with alarms as it was hurled into the blackness of space. He slumped in his seat, his body scarred and aching, his mind reeling from the loss and the horror of what he'd witnessed. As the pod drifted away, he stared out the viewport at the distant glow of the prison's implosion. The void was silent again, but the memory of Mina's sacrifice and the countless lives consumed by the Void Eater would haunt him forever. In the stillness of the pod, Sam closed his eyes. For a moment, he thought he heard her voice, faint and distant, carried on the silence of space. "You're free now, but it's never really over." He opened his eyes to the vast, empty expanse of the universe. Somewhere out there, he knew, other horrors awaited. But for now, he was alive, and that had to be enough.